Modern life. Between careers, kids, and health, it can be mayhem. That's why we're here. I'm Dr. Lisa Varghese-Kroll.
And I'm Dr. Lonray Falusi. We're physicians, moms, and longtime friends who break it all down for you. Wondering how to juggle all the balls and still stay sane? Looking for advice but don't want to be overwhelmed?
Curious about how to make the most out of life for your family but enjoy it at the same time? You're in the right place. Welcome to Health and Home with the Hippocratic hosts.
On this episode, we're giving you the straight talk about vaccines. How do they work? Why is the vaccine schedule written the way it is? And what's the latest on a coronavirus vaccine? Hey, Lisa.
Hey, Lonray. How are you doing?
Oh, taking it one day at a time during this corona life. So, of course, we don't give specifics about our work lives here for patient privacy reasons, but every physician and every healthcare worker can certainly relate to the challenges facing the medical field right now.
Absolutely. We are so grateful for our colleagues, and we certainly relate to the challenges of kids' distance learning and multiple Zoom meetings as well.
Oh, on that front, I'm relying a lot more on chocolate to get me through these days.
I know, but we really have failed our audience, haven't we? We have not talked about chocolate enough on this podcast. We will have to rectify that.
We will rectify that problem. So we'll be sure to add some links to recipes in our show notes for you today.
For sure. Social distancing recipes. I have to say, I tried that New York Times chocolate mug cake, and
how'd it go?
It was, you know what? Like, I don't necessarily want a huge tray of brownies like sitting around the house these days. So a mug cake was just the right size. You know what I mean?
Nice.
Everyone had a mug, and it was gone afterwards. There was nothing left to pick over at midnight. It was great.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I do like a little midnight, chocolate, but yeah, I tried some chocolate chip raspberry banana bread. Ooh. Actually, a recipe that Lisa had shared with me. And maybe you'll hear a little bit more about my dislike of bananas at some point. But found myself with no less than 36 bananas in my house, but found this wonderful banana bread recipe that was just delightful.
And luckily left quite a few bananas over for snacking.
Yeah, not for my snacking, but for more banana bread, let's say. Jumping into our topic for today, we're talking about vaccines, how they work. We'll go through lots of common parent questions that we've heard, questions that you may have about vaccines, and we'll talk about the latest about a potential coronavirus vaccine.
Yes, the question that's on everybody's mind these days, how much longer will this go on? We're going to dive into it.
Absolutely. And with vaccines, I'll say, personally in my experience, my husband and I, we never hesitated to have our children fully vaccinated. I'm a big believer in vaccines and their safety and their efficacy. I did, of course, being a mom, being a parent, I did cringe a little the first time that our first child got vaccines in the doctor's office. But really more so, it was a relief to know that she was starting to build some immunity to some really dangerous illnesses. And professionally, I tell parents that vaccines are just as important as feeding your child healthy foods or using a car seat or a seat belt or having a smoke alarm in your house. It's really all about safety. And it's also just so amazing to me how the incidence of so many serious illnesses has dramatically decreased with vaccines, even just since I've been in practice. There are illnesses that I saw when I was in training 15 years ago that I really don't see anymore, or at least not in great severity, which is just amazing. Vaccines really have been one of our greatest public health success stories.
Right. Listen, no one likes to see their child in pain. My husband and I were no different. That was difficult for us, just like it is for every single parent out there. But part of being a parent is recognizing that sometimes minor pain is necessary in the short term to prevent worse pain in the long term. So there was never a question for us or any of our physician friends at all. And I think that the fact that the vast, vast majority of physicians fully vaccinate each of their own children, knowing all of the pros and cons, is very telling. And my kids, we explained to them the purpose of vaccines. And as they got older, they were very well able to understand that on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important for kids to know what vaccines are and to really get into understanding how they protect them. So, with that, there are 16 childhood illnesses that we regularly prevent through vaccines. Illnesses from measles to influenza to whooping cough to rotavirus that causes dehydration to HPV that causes cancer. But how do vaccines work anyway? So we'll spare you the year-long immunology course that we had the pleasure of taking on, how vaccines work. But briefly, it's helpful to know first what happens when viruses or bacteria enter your body. So your immune system recognizes that there is a foreign invader, and it starts to create proteins called antibodies. So your body learns what type of antibody to create for that particular virus or bacteria, and then it makes more until you fight off the infection. But unfortunately, sometimes our bodies do take a while to build up enough antibodies. And then you either end up in bed for a week with the flu as your body is trying to fight it off, or your child may end up in the hospital with meningitis. So that's where vaccines come in. Vaccines contain tiny particles called antigens that are typically a piece of that virus or bacteria. So when you get a vaccine, your immune system sees, like in quotes, sees that flu antigen, thinks it's the real flu virus, and starts to create antibodies against it. So the great thing is you don't get the real flu, but now your body has all these antibodies ready to fight off the flu if someone coughs or sneezes near you. So basically, antibodies are like superheroes that fight off infections, and vaccines work to rally those troops and get them ready to prevent those viruses or bacteria from multiplying in your body. So there's a whole lot more that we could share about things like live versus inactivated vaccines, but we'll just add some of those helpful links to our show notes for those who really want to dive into it.
Yeah, we would always encourage you guys to go to our website at hippocratichosts.com and check out the show notes after each episode because in an effort to keep each of these episodes from being 4 hours long, we do link a lot of more interesting things there for anyone who wants to do some further reading. So it's true that, when it comes to vaccines, there are many very common questions that we get from parents and some questions that we had ourselves. So we wanted to address some of them. And the first one is that the fact that there are multiple vaccines in early childhood, it sounds like a lot for a child's immune system. Are all of them really necessary? Well, the immune system is not overwhelmed by the number of vaccines that are on our currently recommended schedule. That's because the number of antigens that we encounter through eating or breathing or getting other common childhood infections is way more than what a child encounters from vaccines. And as for the immunizations themselves being necessary, sadly, we physicians have also seen children die from the flu or develop a life-threatening brain infection from chickenpox. Now, thanks to decades of vaccination, many of these diseases are now rare in the U.S., and our memories are short. It's easy to become complacent and start to believe that the vaccines are worse than the diseases themselves. But honestly, for me, my parents grew up in India, and they personally knew people who were forever paralyzed from polio. So they never doubted the value of vaccines because they had firsthand experience with what happens without them. And also, we now live in a global society. And so some of these illnesses are just a plane ride away. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic has made that abundantly clear to all of us.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think it's easy for us to become complacent since we don't see so many of these illnesses as often. They're still around, but just not as prevalent. It's almost as if vaccines have become too successful in that sense, where people forget that these illnesses were just so endemic and were so painful to people and caused so much devastation. So a similar question that sometimes parents will ask is about the timing of vaccines. So is it okay to delay them or to space them out? And the reality is there are lots of good reasons why the pediatric vaccine schedule is set up the way that it is. So there is a dedicated, experienced group of physicians and scientists called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP, and they constantly reevaluate the schedule to make it optimal for preventing illness and for your own scheduling of visits to your child's doctor. So the vaccine schedule is based on decades of research that's continuously being updated. And the unfortunate thing is these spaced out schedules that some people try to do sort of this quote unquote alternative scheduling, they just have no scientific basis and they actually just increase your baby's risk. These spaced out schedules are pretty random, as much as some may try to make them look scientific. And spacing them out is actually not a happy medium. It's like putting on your seatbelt just some of the time, or not replacing the battery in your smoke alarm for weeks or months at a time. And it's really best for everyone's safety that we follow that gold standard vaccine schedule. And experimenting with other schedules is just not worth the risk. Also, part of the concern with delaying or spacing out vaccines is that doing so can lengthen the time that your child remains vulnerable to these illnesses. So, if, for example, you delay the 4-month-old vaccines until your baby is 6 months, that means another 2 months of potentially being exposed to illnesses like pertussis or to bacteria that cause pneumonia. And at that age, even just 2 months is a long time.
Right? It's like a third of your life.
Right, right, exactly, exactly.
Yeah, and another common question is specifically about the hepatitis B vaccine because that is usually the first vaccine that we give most often within 24 hours after a baby is born. And the reason that it's given that early is because the earlier a person is infected with hepatitis B, the more likely they are to develop liver cancer from the virus. But the vaccine is up to 95% effective when the series is started at birth. And we also know that about 2 out of every 3 babies who are infected with hepatitis B did not get it from their mother, but from other family members or other people who may not even know that they have hepatitis. So by the time they know, it may be too late for that baby if they weren't vaccinated at birth. So while, yes, you and your child went through a lot during that delivery, we know every delivery is definitely a marathon. But getting the hepatitis B vaccine won't overwhelm your baby. It just takes one worry off everyone's plate.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think anyone who's had a child remembers those first few days or months and just how overwhelming that is. It's great to know that there's at least one thing that you don't have to worry about your child encountering.
Right.
With vaccines, let's talk about side effects. So, what side effects might you expect from vaccines, and when should you be worried about those side effects? So, vaccines, like any medical treatment or procedure, or really anything that we do related to our health, can have side effects. But the good news is those side effects are rare, and when they do happen, they typically are mild, like redness or pain or swelling at the site of the injection. And I know that even though we consider them to be mild, kids can be miserable with those side effects. We definitely understand that. But the good thing is they usually resolve pretty quickly on their own. Or if you put, cold, wet towel at the site of the injection, you'll usually see that redness and pain start to go away. Fevers can also occur. So about 5 to 10% of the time, a child may get a fever after getting vaccines. And those can also usually be relieved with cool compresses, drinking extra water, and if recommended by your pediatrician, maybe taking a fever reducer like acetaminophen or ibuprofen. But do check first with your pediatrician because sometimes giving these medications too close to after getting the vaccine can make them a little bit less effective. But really, if your child has any reaction that concerns you or anything more significant than these mild symptoms, then we would definitely encourage you to call your child's pediatrician and talk through those concerns.
Right. Always great advice. So many people ask, why is going to my child's doctor's office, the pediatrician or the family doctor, why is that better than going to a pharmacy or an urgent care for my kids' vaccines? Well, there are many reasons. One of them is continuity of care. Having the same person or the same team of physicians watching over your children as they grow is really important because that's how you pick up on little things. That's how small details don't fall through the cracks. That's also how you avoid duplication, avoid giving your kids vaccines that they've already had and don't actually need. While that's generally not dangerous, none of us want to give our kids extra shots. And also at your doctor's office, that's where you receive checkups. Checkups are more than just vaccines. Checkups are where your child's nutrition, their growth curve, their learning, their mental health, all these things are examined and evaluated as well. That's what true all-encompassing medical care should be. And when you get your care on a regular basis at kind of a drop-in center, you do miss all those aspects of good care.
I think that is such a great point. And, urgent cares or, pharmacies that give vaccines have their place. But when it comes to your child's vaccines, going to your regular place of care, your medical home, as we call it, is really the best place to make sure that all of those things are checked, not just kind of giving the vaccines that we may normally give at that particular age. So another question that comes up sometimes is this question of, so if I choose not to vaccinate my child, or if I choose to decline certain vaccines, but all the other children around my child, whether it's school or on the playground, if they're all vaccinated, then isn't my child protected? So this question gets to the concept of herd immunity, in that if you are not vaccinated, then being surrounded by people or by a herd who are vaccinated and are immune means that you are unlikely to get sick, right? So if they're all vaccinated, then they're protected against an illness and then less likely to pass it on to you who may not be vaccinated. But there's a limit to herd immunity. So once the percentage of people who are immune to an illness drops below a certain level, then that actually just rips a hole into that herd immunity protection. So it only takes a handful of kids in one classroom to go unvaccinated before they're all at risk of getting sick. And remember, we vaccinate not just to protect ourselves, but also to protect everyone else around us. So that's what herd immunity really is. When all of us who can get vaccinated do, then we're less likely to infect people who can't get vaccines. So that includes people who have medical reasons not to get vaccines because they're going through cancer treatment, or they have documented allergies to a component of a vaccine, or they recently had a transplant. So the bottom line is vaccinating your child and yourself is just an awesome way to put a shield of protection around those people in our society.
Right. And it's important to remember if your child is unvaccinated, you have no control over who they might come in contact with. It's not just other children, but if there's another carrier of a disease, even if it's not a human, if it's an animal or it's on a surface, and your child is unvaccinated, your child will be the one that's susceptible compared to the other children who are vaccinated.
Right, right. And that's again the beauty of vaccines. It doesn't matter sort of when or where you encounter these potential infections. If you're vaccinated, those antibodies, they're ready. They're ready to
Right.
protect you or your child. So let's get on to the topic that's on everyone's mind, COVID-19.
Yes, what we are all thinking about nonstop.
Right, right. So let's talk about vaccines, just like the regular, childhood vaccines in the time of COVID-19. So, how important is it to keep your child's vaccines up to date during this pandemic? Is some a question that I've gotten is, my kid isn't really socializing much right now anyway. How important is it to leave the house, and actually go to the doctor's office for vaccines? Well, the thing is, unfortunately, we've seen a really sharp decline in vaccine rates since the onset of the pandemic. Understandably, as everyone was sheltering in place and not going to their doctor's visits. But the problem is, this could lead to lower herd immunity, as we talked about before, which is really worrisome as people are now starting to mingle again in certain states. And really, every state in the nation as of today has relaxed some of their shelter in place laws. So it's really important to stay up to date on all the usual vaccines. Sure, no one wants to see COVID-19 spread through a community, and that's why we're all sheltering in place and social distancing. But at the same time, we would hate to see outbreaks of measles and whooping cough because people didn't go and get vaccinated once kids start congregating again together. So keep following the standard vaccine recommendations and just know that your pediatrician is there for you.
Well, along those same lines, many people ask, how can I be sure that taking my child to the doctor is safe right now? Well, doctors everywhere have been working hard to balance keeping our patients healthy with wanting to limit people's exposure to the coronavirus. We've been amazed at how quickly so many hospitals and practices have moved to create telehealth video visits or are able to do more by phone. So we would recommend calling your child's doctor and finding out what your options are. It may be a combination of a video visit to talk about your child's health, a quick visit in the office to give the vaccines, vaccines given in the parking lot to maximize social distancing, and other creative ways that practices have tried to make sure that kids don't become susceptible to vaccine-preventable illnesses while we're fighting this pandemic. So there may not be time to make up that protection once social distancing ends, and your kids are exposed to microbes again if they missed their vaccines during social distancing. So one of the most loving things you can do for your kids is keep them up to date now.
Oh, certainly. On the thread of coronavirus, we really can't talk about vaccines without mentioning the coronavirus vaccine. So we're all anticipating the development of this vaccine because a safe and effective coronavirus vaccine means that more people can develop immunity to this virus, leading to fewer hospitalizations and deaths, and more confidence in our ability to be able to move more freely in society. So there's no vaccine yet, but here's what we know. So several teams of researchers around the world are working on developing a vaccine, and a few, about 3 so far, have had promising but very early results. It's far too soon to say that these vaccines work, though we're hopeful that we'll get there. The vaccine development process starts with trials to make sure that a vaccine is safe. Before you even test how well it works, you need to know that it's safe. So we're still in that phase of testing the safety and are just starting to look at the efficacy of these potential vaccines. So to be clear, we should not rush through this process. A vaccine that lacks in safety or efficacy is not very helpful. Plus, developing a vaccine just isn't enough. It doesn't stop there. There are logistics of getting the vaccine out to the entire population, which is really complex, and that itself will add months of time. So again, it's too early for us to say when we think a vaccine will be released, but I know I want to trust the process and have patience so that we can all be confident in the final product whenever that comes.
Right. And the fact that even with all this global pressure to bring a vaccine to market and unprecedented resources being put towards COVID vaccine development, it will still take 12 to 18 months. That should be very reassuring to anyone who still has doubts about vaccine safety. Other vaccines that weren't rushed to market and have had decades of use have definitely earned our confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are all just in high anticipation. But I think for myself and for both of us, knowing that it actually took a while to get to the optimal vaccine, the optimal way of administering it is reassuring.
Exactly.
We wouldn't want something that people have rushed through.
So it's okay to have questions about vaccines, but get the facts. But on that note, what is the best way to get factual info on vaccines? Well, we absolutely encourage you to do your own research, but do real research, not Facebook research or asking Dr. Google.
Right.
There are so many myths that have been debunked with decades of research, many more than we can address here. So when you have questions about vaccines, we would encourage you to, of course, talk to your child's doctor, but also look at these resources and share them with friends and family who have questions about vaccines. In a future episode, we'll be talking about how to know if what you're reading online is legitimate or not, but in the meantime, here are some tips on where to find truthful, accurate information on vaccines for yourself, look up the science behind any myths that you might have heard, and to share with those in your circle who might have questions. And we'll also put these links in our show notes.
Great. So the first site is the Immunization Action Coalition, and their website is vaccineinformation.org. It's a super comprehensive website. If you go on, you'll find information sheets for each vaccine that we give. These are actually the same information sheets that we give to patients in our office. So I can attest to how valid they are and sort of quick and easy to read through. There's a lot of good information on vaccines on that website, from infants to teens to seniors. So good for all age groups. It also has videos about vaccines, including a really cute one of Elmo and former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy talking about vaccines.
Is there any more trusted public official than Elmo, that national treasure?
So I thought you were going to say no more trusted individual than a former Surgeon General. But when it comes to kids, Elmo wins hands down.
No, it's Elmo,
every time.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. He takes the cake. So second website is the CDC. And of course, we can't talk about vaccines without mentioning the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. That website is cdc.gov/vaccines. So the CDC has the most updated vaccine schedules for all ages, and it's presented in various ways. So some are printable, some are interactive and colorful. It's definitely the go-to site to see what you or your family might be due for. It also has details about vaccines needed for things like international travel. So you might want to pocket that one when we, eventually are able to get back out into public and be able to travel again.
As opposed to pulling up travel blogs and lovingly caressing my laptop screen. Is that normal?
Totally normal. Totally
Good.
normal to weep over travel blogs and just, yes, do some daydreaming about getting past, the next block or getting out of the hospital once in a while. Yes, completely normal. Next, two sites are really great for answering a lot of your questions as parents or as individuals. One is healthychildren.org, and that comes from the American Academy of Pediatrics, and vaccinateyourfamily.org, which comes from an organization called Every Child by Two. So both sites have answers to some really common parent questions about things like the vaccine schedule, ingredients in vaccines, and the role of research companies in vaccine development and why we can actually trust the companies that create vaccines. So on the vaccinateyourfamily.org website, if you go to questions about vaccines, we'd encourage you to especially check out two sections there. One is understanding vaccine science, and the other is vaccine research. These sections in particular are super helpful for busting myths about vaccine safety and who's behind vaccine research. So the reason that we and the medical community as a whole support these organizations and these positions about vaccines is because they have combined decades more research and confirmed science behind them than those sources that don't fully support vaccines or that advocate these kind of unusual schedules.
Right. I think that's a really important point. The reason the medical community supports this position is because that's where the science leads.
Absolutely. And when we have that science behind us, that's where we can really feel safe and confident that we're making the right decisions.
So now it's time for our Physician Mom Life Hack of the Week. And on this episode, we're sharing a way to make shots less stressful for your kids and therefore less stressful for you. So when my two kiddos were little and still had most of their shots ahead of them, we gave each of them a little vaccination sticker book. And every time they got a shot, they got a new sticker for their book. And their excitement over the new stickers slowly started to overtake their dread of the upcoming shot. And they were so proud of the collection that they amassed. And you can tweak this to fit your own kids' interests, of course. Like maybe their stickers are themed or they get temporary tattoos instead of stickers or what have you. But either way, anything that gives them something small to look forward to, that they, some positive that they can associate with something that is painful, anything that means fewer tears and more smiles is a win-win for everyone.
I think that is so cute. I think it's so cute. I know that we give stickers to kids after they get vaccines, but I love the idea of them coming in with like their own little book ready to get their sticker. And then they have, after a few years, they've like amassed all these stickers in their book and so proud of themselves.
Exactly. And we would date them too so that they could go back and look and be proud of themselves. So
love that.
So that's our show for today. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, we're really appreciative of the time that you spend with us. And again, just follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, where you can find us at Hippocratic Hosts. And we would be thrilled if you would review us in Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast platform you prefer. It just takes 30 seconds of your time, but it means a whole lot to us. Thanks so much, and join us again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Health at Home with the Hippocratic Hosts. Remember that all views expressed here are our own, not our employers, and all content is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice, nor the establishment of a doctor-patient relationship. Always consult your own physician or healthcare team for any medical issues.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate us, subscribe, and tell a friend. And check out our website at www.hippocratichosts.com for show notes on this and all our episodes. Can't wait to chat with you next time.